All right, good afternoon, one more time, everybody. And today I have with me Mr. Carl Zaw. How are you doing today, Carl?
Hi, Kyle. How are you?
Excellent, and I hope you're doing well. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation today. I guess first things first, give my listeners a introduction of yourself and everything that you do.
I'm a prolific ship poster online. I do have a Twitter account. I post a lot, but I mostly post everything about China. I run a podcast,
Mhm.
Silk and Steel podcast, which covers everything China, history, politics, and culture. I was born in China in 1976, right after the Cultural Revolution ended. And I grew up in China until so I grew up in China in the decade of 1980s. I
Mhm.
came to United States in 1990, right after the Tiananmen Square protest, because my dad was studying in U.S. in 1985 for his
Mhm.
PhD, and after Tiananmen Square protest, he decided he's not going to go back to China. Instead, he's going to bring his family to the U.S. So I came to U.S. in 1990, started uh, eighth grade. Yeah, I started eighth grade, and did my high school, college, all in the U.S. And now I am in Bali, Indonesia. So
What is the class mobility kind of like in Asian countries? Because in here, or at least like in my state in Pennsylvania, it's pretty cheap to live, but because it's cheap to live here, you can't really move out of Pennsylvania. And I feel like a lot of people all over the US are kind of in that same situation, unless you're in like New York or California where the cost of living is really high. If you're in a flyover state or somewhere like I live, you can't really move out. You're kind of stuck here. Is that different in places that you've been, or what's that like?
China is quite different because China, there's a drastic change in the last 40 years. When I was born in China in 1976,
Mhm.
you cannot move around so much because you are
Sure.
basically tied to the place of your birth by something called the household registration. So, for example,
Mm.
um, my parents, they were sent down to the Tibetan region of China in during the Cultural Revolution. My dad, right after his graduation from college, and my mom after graduating nursing school, they were sent to like the Tibetan highlands, and that's where they met and got married. And when they gave birth to me, my household registration would be tied to my birthplace. My parents didn't want me to stay with them because they felt like, uh, first of all, it's like 4,000 meters up in the
Mhm.
air, and they also wanted me to have better educational opportunities. So they sent me. So I didn't. My mom actually went to her hometown in Chongqing in southwest China to
Mhm.
give birth to me, and then I stayed with my grandma. But the problem is, in China back in those days, if you don't have household registration in your locality, you cannot go to school,
Oh
and
wow.
you cannot go to kindergarten, you cannot go to school, you cannot work because in 1970s, China was very much still a command economy. So everything
Mhm.
is like government assigned. Like this is why my parents got sent to Tibet in the first place because uh, when people graduate from college, the government would assign you a job. You don't have a much a choice. Like my dad originally was supposed to be sent somewhere else, but his classmates kind of bribed the
Mhm.
bribed the school official, so he
Mhm.
got shafted. He got sent to the up the Tibetan Islands. Luckily, my grandma, she worked as a school teacher, so she know a lot of people. She know a lot of parents who had various connections. So somehow I was able to. They were able to. They took us several years, but finally they were able to change my local registration to my mother's hometown, which is where I was born. But it took a while, and it's to the point where like my mom even had trouble giving birth to me because I'm the second
Mhm.
child. In 1976, that's when China's just started to experiment with family planning, one-child policy. They started in selective cities. So
Hmm.
my mom's hometown, Chongqing, was one of the first to implement one-child policy.
Oh wow.
That's why when I went to school in China, I think I was the only one who had a sibling, older
Hmm.
sister, and when my mom went to the hospital to give birth to me, she almost wasn't admitted because the hospital director says like, "What are you doing? We're like the model hospital for doing birth."
Hmm.
Family planning. If you're gonna give birth to your second child, that's gonna screw up our reputation. But my mom's like, wait, you don't understand. You know, they have the one child policy in Chongqing, but where where we work, because at that time the policy was first rolled out, it was different. You know, the one child policy didn't extend to the national minorities. It didn't extend to Tibetans, but it also didn't extend to like the majority Han Chinese who work in the
Hmm.
Tibetan area. Like my parents, they would be allowed to have two children. So I was actually legal, but my mom trying to explain the policy to them, but the hospital director wasn't buying it. He's like, "What? You mean Tibet is not part of China? What do you mean you have a different policy?" And so in the end, my grandma had to find my mom a different hospital. You know, again through my grandma's connection because she
Hmm.
knows a lot of people. So I was allowed to be born, and then yes, it was a very different time back then in
Hmm.
1976. My you know, you not only you're not allowed to have your job, but when I was going through school, I remember I was being told, my parents are like, don't cause trouble, because
Hmm.
if you did something bad in school, that's going to go on your file. And that file is going to follow you through the rest of your life till the time when they assign jobs when you
Hmm.
graduate. I was like, holy shit. And, but obviously that's not true anymore because China shifted to a market economy. So, you know, now government do not assign jobs for college graduates,
Hmm.
and you're responsible for your own career path. And there's a lot more freedom of movement in China. You're not you know, like tied to the place of your birth anymore.
Hmm.
And so yeah, so I mean, like it's almost undescribable the kind of the huge transformation China experienced in the last 40 years, you know, since I
Hmm.
was born. Because when I was born in 1980s, China was a very, very poor country. Like when my dad came to US to study in 1985, you know, his professor would ask him, you know, like, in China, how much did you earn? Because my dad was an instructor in university in China before he went to US to pursue his PhD. He said he was making like equivalent of $300 USD per month. And
Wow.
the professor was shocked. It was like, how can you live in that kind of salary? But in China back then, again, you know, like it's the standard of living is different because back then you don't have to pay for your housing.
Hmm.
My dad, the university assigned him an apartment, and you don't have to pay for healthcare. Like if you're an urban resident, if you're attached to like a state-owned enterprise, including university. So when I was 13, I contracted hepatitis A, and I was hospitalized for like a couple months. I didn't have to pay for a dime because I went to the hospital um, of the Chongqing number one textile factory. That was because my grandma worked as a teacher at the school that was attached to the Chongqing
Hmm.
number one textile factory. Also back then, it's very socialist. So each state-owned
Sure.
enterprise, they will have their own hospital, their own schools. So all the families of their employee of the factory, they would receive free healthcare. So I was
Hmm.
hospitalized for 2 months. I didn't have to pay anything. But then again, that was only limited to like urban residents who work in a state-owned enterprise. Like that that healthcare did not extend to like the vast majority of Chinese back then, which still live in the countryside. In 1980, China did a census in 1982. That's when China first hit the 1 billion mark in terms of population. But 80% of the population back then, 800 million Chinese, still live on the farm, in the countryside, on subsistence farming. Yeah, and the cities, that's why like they couldn't extend, like for example, the free healthcare to everyone, because it's like they wouldn't be able to afford it. So it was only limited to the urban residents who worked for a state-owned enterprise. And so but in 1980s, that system was already starting to break down because China started to experiment with market reform. They, because before once you get hired on, it's like cradle to grave. You like kind of guarantee a job until you retire. But when China started market reform, the state-owned factory already, there was no private industry back then in early 1980s. So the state-owned industry started experimenting with like hiring contractual workers from the countryside where they don't have to pay for the healthcare. They don't have to promise them lifetime employment. They pay by the contracted work, and eventually they allow private enterprise. I remember in 1980s, a lot of the first people who got rich in China are those private entrepreneurs, and especially those small business owner, like restaurant owners, people who open a street side restaurant, even like a food stand. There was a joke that the old grandma who sells the tea eggs on the street makes more than the professors who work on the nuclear weapons. But it was true. It was true because at that time, the professor's salary was set at a fixed level by the state. But if you're a private entrepreneur, you can make as much money as you want. The sky is the limit. So there was a lot of changes, and I remember in one of the trigger for the Tiananmen Square protest in 1989 was the runaway inflation, because when China started market reform, there was two pricing systems. One system was set by the state for all the state-owned enterprises, how much they can, how much things should cost, how much things they should sell for. And the other system is the market price, So what happened is a lot of people who have the connection, who can like say get material from a state-owned enterprise at the state set artificially deflated price, and then turn around and sell them on open market, you can make a killing. So there was a lot of corruption, and when they try to lift the price control, it kind of trigger high inflation, and a lot of the urban residents start getting left behind, like people who are getting paid salaries, like school teachers, professors, doctors, and so there was a widespread protest in 1989, originally to protest the corruption and protest the high inflation, but eventually that turned into a political movement. So that led to the final crackdown like 2 months later. It was crazy time, because to tell you just how much big difference happened in early 80s to late 80s. In the early 80s, like my sister is 4 years older than me, and so I would use some of her like unused school notebook when I went to school. So I saw one of her old unused notebook from 1979, right? And on the back, still full of political slogans like "Be vigilant against the evil Soviet social imperialism." Like, so when I saw that in mid 1980s, I already felt like, wow, that language is kind of strident. Like, is that necessary? When I first grew up in early 80s, I remember there was very little cultural input from the outside world, but we would have movies and TV series imported from like socialist countries like former Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia back then was still on good terms with China, but China Sino-Soviet split was still going on, so we wouldn't have any Soviet movies. But in the mid '80s, I start seeing like Soviet movies showing on late like War and Peace and then like the Soviet movies from '80s and '70s starts showing up on state television. So that's when it was like, oh, maybe the Sino-Soviet split is over. So that it did happen in 1989 when Gorbachev finally visited Beijing, and that right in the middle of the Tiananmen Square protests, and that's also a lot of the foreign tourists were actually in Beijing, not tourists, sorry, journalists were actually in Beijing to cover the historical summit between Gorbachev and Deng Xiaoping. It just so happened when they came to town, they say, "Oh, holy crap! There's like a 1 million man protest in the middle of the Tiananmen Square." Like they were supposed to receive Gorbachev in the Tiananmen Square, but they couldn't because there was a million students sitting in there. So they had to like have his reception at the Beijing airport. And so that's why there was a lot of media coverage of the Tiananmen Square because a lot of the tourists were flying in at that time. So around that time, I was like 12 or 13. I was just like kind of old enough to know kind of what's going on. And I just remember I was like kind of jealous of the university students because we live because my dad was a lecturer at the Chongqing University. So we live on the university campus at the university provided housing. So I kind of grew up around those college students, and I was like, damn, they don't have to go to school and they just go protest. Shit, man, I want that because I went to junior high. We still had to go to school. So one day I put I said, I think there was a time when the Chinese government also like they went back and forth on whether to recognize the student movement as patriotic. There was a time when one faction of the government kind of won out temporarily. They say, "Oh, the student movement is patriotic, but you guys should go back to school." But I use the opportunity to write something in our school because my real goal is to get us out of class. I don't want to go to school. And I just say, yeah, see, the government said the student movement is patriotic. We should go out in the street and to support them. And at that time, like everybody in my class, like they hailed me as a hero. It felt pretty good. But like no, our teacher was pretty hard ass. She wouldn't let us out. We lived in Chongqing, but you know the main focus of the protest, of course, is in Beijing. But there was protests all over China, in different part of China. I would go to the protest after school because everybody went. Like our teachers, our teachers went to protest. And it's pretty wild. It was like it's a mass movement because you have all these people on the street. It's kind of festive, but I'm kind of going all over the place. So stop me anytime.
No, you're good. This is awesome because I've really got to talk to too many people who've like been in Asia or lived in Asia.